The Nagaland Community Conserved Area Forum and the Kezekevi Thehoba have urged the Nagaland government, political leaders, NGOs, student bodies, church bodies and tribal organizations to raise their voice against the amended Forest Conservation Act 2023, which was passed in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha last week. The Nagaland Community Conserved Area Forum said that the act is not in the interest of the indigenous tribal communities of Nagaland, as it challenges the land and forest rights of the people who have been its custodians since time immemorial. There is huge ambiguity over the definitions and provisions of the act, putting the rights and security of the people at stake, it stated in a press release. It further pointed out that in recent decades, communities in Nagaland have voluntarily come forward to take up conservation practices in their traditional ancestral lands to sustain and preserve the rich biodiversity, resulting in the recognition and documentation of over 407 community conserved areas in Nagaland, which is one of the world's top biodiversity hotspots. However, the provisions of the Act could jeopardize the traditional land ownership, likewise threaten the biodiversity and the ecological security of the region, the NCCAF said. It expressed concern that instead of encouraging the indigenous people who are voluntarily conserving the environment, this will certainly devastate their efforts. The forum said that the act would weaken the decision and power of the state government, undermine community ownership of land and forests, and the village councils may become voiceless. This may result in the extinction of the rich biodiversity of the indigenous people and ancestral birthright be devastated, annihilated just for the sake of development and security reasons. This will result in devastating effects on the people as well as our biodiversity. It added. The NCAFF cautioned that if the act is unopposed by the people's representatives, the ancestral forest, which is the identity of the Nagas, will be left for arbitrary diversion and decisions of the central government, as it excluded obtaining prior consent from village councils and local district authorities. And now to talk a little more on the Forest Conservation Amendment Act 2023 and if this new amended act will actually affect the age-old customs that the Nagas have always preserved our forests. We have our associate editor Alangoli who will be joining us, and we will be discussing about this new amended act and whether it will affect the autonomy of the Nagas, especially with concern to conserving our forests. First of all, thank you so much, Al, for joining me on this special newsroom. Coming directly into the conversation, we've got a lot of CSOs voicing out their concern over the new Forest Conservation Amendment Act 2023. So, sir, just in brief and in plain, what is the controversy behind the new bill and why are the Nagas opposing it? Why are the CSOs opposing it?
Yeah, it is very simple. I think the controversy would not have been in the first place if there was prior consultation with the state government and especially the community leaderships of the tribal people in India. The Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023 is just a small change to the Forest Conservation Act of India 1980. So while the spirit of the Conservation Act itself is carried forward from the 1980 Act into the 2023 Act, there have been a number of small changes here and there. Unfortunately, these small changes have come to pose a very serious threat to the land ownership security of the tribal people of India. And it's not only just the Northeast, but of course the Northeast tribal communities will be most affected, whose say over the lands they live in, the control over the lands will be affected greatly, not just in terms of administrative security that the government of India seeks to implement if the law is passed and implemented across the regions, but also in terms of the control over the forest and land resources even in the future. So the first change here is that carrying some of the elements of the 1980 Act into the 2023 amendment. The first is that the government of India will have control over forest lands without having to consult with the community leadership or the state governments, because these borderlands coming within 100 meters of the borders bordering the country and the country states, especially the regions of Northeast, they will be commanded by the government of India without having to seek prior consultations from the community leadership and the state government of that concerned state. That is the first one. And using this particular amendment, this change, the government of India will be able to implement a lot of developmental projects, or that is what they claim, IKV. But if you read at the amendment and the wording that is given in the legislation, it's a bit vague, just as you mentioned a little bit earlier. There is a lot of ambiguity in the way the government of India is defining what, for instance, a forest land is, because the Forest Act of India 1927 itself clearly defines what a forest is, and the government of the states can notify whether a particular area can be called a forest or not. But in the case of the 2023 bill, the government of India says we will be able to put our hands in those forest areas of the tribal communities to implement what is called the strategic linear projects of national importance. I don't know, it sounds very hi-fi, you know, and it sounds very intellectual, but we don't know what it really means. But what media observers say is that when you put a bunch of words together with the words national security and importance, then you are practically talking about security at the borders. You are talking about military installations and possibly other facilities that only the military establishment can access, and which is close off to the community activity. So that is the first change. And the second change is that the notification in regard to what kind of an area should be called a forest area is changed in the 2023 Amendment Bill, which means the Forest Act of 1927 and the definition it gives to forest areas will be changed now if the 2023 Amendment is implemented across the country. It will no longer be forest as has been defined in the 1927 Act. It will be now dependent on the whims of the government of India, what can be called forest, what can be called a notified forest, and what can be retracted from the status of a forest, which means, let's say, Ranga Bahar Zoological Park we have. Tomorrow, you don't know, the government of India might say, oh, Nagaland is right at the border, and the Chinese people are giving us a lot of problems here, so we will no longer call it a zoological park, we're going to call it a special forest zone of the government of India, and we'll set up an Air Force station here, we'll set up military posts here. So that is the danger. The third is, and this is the heart of the controversy, if the government wants to call a forest, it's going to call it, they are not going to call the government of India to define what a forest is, whether it belongs to the Angamis or the Aus or Lotha or Sumi. It doesn't matter. If the government of India wants to command that particular area, they're going to come in and build zoos, safaris, they can even build Air Force stations, military installations can be put up there. So you do not need the sanction of the community leadership or the permission of the government of that particular state for whatever reason you might want to use that particular forest area for your whims.
All right, so regarding this particular act, the Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023, I think it was the Naga People's Front party leader Kuzuluzu Nenu who alerted the government that they should be holding a special assembly session of the Nagaland Legislative Assembly and then pick up a legislation and say that Nagaland will not go forward with implementing the new amended act. Well, apart from the NPF, we've got the Ausenden, and now we've even got the Pom People's Council that have raised an alarm over the implementation of the new Forest Act. So is this call for a special session of the Nagaland Legislative Assembly to ratify on this particular notification? You think this is a legit call by the organizations and that particular political party, sir?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a good thing for us, the citizens here, that we have also got legislators who are in tune with what is going on in Delhi. And frankly, even as a media person, most of us, we didn't even know what the Forest Amendment Act was until it was passed just a week ago, Agivi.
Yes.
And we have someone sitting here who has been keeping tabs of what is going on in the parliament. We wouldn't even have known if somebody had not issued some kind of a statement telling us, hey, oh, you guys are in danger, your forests are in danger because the government of India has passed a legislation in this regard and you should read this and do this and that. Why? Because your lives and your livelihood, especially those in the forest areas, they are in danger, and most importantly, your identity as a people, as a tribal community is in danger if you don't keep a tap on this. So it's a good thing that the legislature brought up this issue, because as far as I'm concerned, even 2 weeks ago, the media was not picking up on this story. Akivi, I think we have talked about this. So definitely, this is a wake-up call for the community organizations in Nagaland. I think we should consider it an insult if we consider it a responsibility of only the tribal bodies and the communities. This should be a concern that keeps the government of Nagaland awake until it is redressed. Akive. It is not just about the people of the districts, people who have land holding ownership over forests and land resources. It should also be a concern of the government of Nagaland, and they should ideally be the first to actually speak up on this. I saw a message on WhatsApp in a group earlier saying that the Chief Minister of Nagaland was telling the people of Nagaland that they should not be worried about the Forest Amendment Act. I'm not sure whether that was an authentic message that the Chief Minister was giving out, or it was just something that someone made up and was passing it around. I don't know. But what I know is this: the Forest Amendment Act right now in its present form is dangerous to the identity of the people of Nagaland, because our lives are all deeply connected with the culture of the forest. Our livelihoods are all connected with the forest, and our identities as cultural people, our songs and our folklore, our literature, and the ideals that define who we are as a people moving forward is defined by the stories and the spirits of the natural world, Akivi. And these are the forests, our lands, and our rivers. So it is important, definitely, that the government of Nagaland should sit together. And I agree with the community organizations and Mr. Nina here that the first thing we should do here is just have a sitting in the Legislative Assembly, discuss over it. And I don't think there should be a debate in this, because the very fact that the Amendment Act itself says that the government of India it is not obligated in any way to seek the permission of the community and the government of Nagaland in regard to handing over lands to private entities. That itself is a red flag, Akivi. So definitely, I think the ideal and the most logical move for the government of Nagaland is to call a special assembly, discuss on it for the merit of it, not because you want to deter it, but because there is a merit in educating the people what this amendment is all about, and then pass a resolution. And I think we have been given a very important constitutional tool in this regard, Article 371, to bypass the legislation that we now know as the Forest Amendment Act. Akive.
All right, so you had initially mentioned a term called national security.
Right.
So, and this term called national security seems to be making quite the buzz.
A lot.
I mean, apart from the Forest Amendment Act, a few other bills were passed in the monsoon session of the Parliament, amongst which the sedition law was also repealed, but then they have entered the national security threat. They have added that. Now, leaving that aside, sir, I mean, in the name of national security, I mean, in the bill, they have also made that the center has the rights to build strategic centers around the borders. So, in the name of national security, could the center actually enforce this amendment to the state of Nagaland? And in terms of the legality of the enforcement, would it be legal in the eyes of law, sir?
Definitely not. Like I said earlier, and this has been the case for the for Nagaland when it comes to implementing laws that are passed by Delhi. So most of the time, I think we have had a good fortune to be able to enjoy the constitutional tool that is provided to us in the form of Article 371, with which we can use to bypass any kind of central laws that might affect us directly, indirectly, our customs and our practices, our land holding rights and our ownership over natural resources in the state of Nagaland. So we have been given that constitutional tool. But like I said earlier, when we talk about national security here, the term can be used arbitrarily by any government. Yes. So here we have the Forest Amendment. We didn't know what the Forest Amendment Act was just 2 weeks ago. But now on hindsight, when you think about it, just before the Manipur issue became the top newsmaker for the news space in the country and abroad, I don't know, but if you remember, the governments of Mizoram, the government of Assam and Meghalaya, they were engaging in border talks to resolve the border issues between the states, right?
Yes.
So when I think of it now, it is quite logical that the government of India, and especially the states ruled by the BJP, would start mobilizing their the framework of the move that they were going to make in the monsoon session. So I believe that they were actually setting the ground for them to be able to implement the Forest Amendment Act, for instance. So now if you think of it, they were actually working behind the scenes and working and bringing it to the parliament's table. They were able to legitimize what they now call national security. And national security is too ambiguous. You don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the underground groups in the northeast states, Akivi, or are you talking about China? Or even Burma? You know, India has about 1,625 square kilometers of borders with Myanmar, Akivi. And it should interest you that when we are talking of the Forest Amendment Act, we are not talking about India in general. We are talking only about the northeast states that have borders with some other countries, Burma in this case, Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Nagaland and Manipur. These four states have about 1,624 square kilometers borders with Myanmar. And it is very interesting, Akivi, when we are talking of national security issues. In 2004, the government of India started the what you call the India-Myanmar border barrier, right?
Yes.
They were building that barrier. And then along the way, the governments of Mizoram protested because they have got people on the other side of the state in Burma who are from Mizoram or who have ethnic familiar relations with the people of Mizoram. And then came the protest from the Kukis and the Nagas in Manipur, who felt that the Indo-Myanmar barrier is going to infringe on the land holding rights of the people in Manipur, the Naga people in Manipur. And if you build that barrier, you're going to have serious problems. The argument of the government of India was that this barrier is going to stop drug trafficking, first thing, fake currency, human trafficking, and of course, even if we don't say it, the elephant in the room, that is the insurgency that is being waged across the borders from the side of Burma and from the Indian side, from Nagaland, from Mizoram and Manipur. So there are a lot of insurgent groups who are active in this area. So when the government of India is talking about national security, I believe that they want to use the idea of development and progress within the border areas to be able to snuff out all the political activities against India from the border, especially from among the insurgents, and of course stop cross-border criminal activities in this regard. Akivek.
Well, coming back to the topics, I mean, Nagaland has been blessed abundantly because we've got a lot of forest area which is still virgin in nature. It's not been cut or felled, and I think the village councils are doing a marvelous and tremendous job in protecting the biodiversity that is already present in our states. Now, so basically this law talks about forest conservation. So don't you think when it comes to conservation of a forest, the indigenous people of the forest are best suited to conserve the forest rather than having people from outside come and then tell us about conservation, when we ourselves, we've been practicing conservation from time immemorial, which various organizations have stated. So don't you think that the forest in Nagaland are better conserved by the Nagas themselves, sir?
And I'm quite surprised with that question, because just a few minutes ago I was writing a story in regard to the Congress leader Rahul Gandhi saying that the tribal people of India are the original owners of the country. It is not the government, it is not the legislations, and no matter what you do, you can never take away the rights of the tribal people of the country, that they are the original owners of the forests and the lands and the rivers and the natural resources that they live in. So definitely it goes without saying there is a particular wisdom in saying tribal owners, because we are not just people who have been given guardianship over the lands and forests and the natural resources that we live among. What we have here is the wisdom that we ourselves, from time immemorial, we know the sight and the sound, the personality and the spirit of the natural resources that we have been given. So definitely this is the heart of the controversy, why the Forest Amendment Act of 2023 is an act that the northeastern states should not let it pass without a fight, because once you talk about tribal rights over the land, you are not just talking about the claim of a certain people over a piece of land and water. You are talking about the potential that the land can give you in the long run with our children and with our grandchildren. So there is wisdom that can be exercised only by the community who are owners of the land. So now the amendment has of course, the media constantly reports that the government of India has a vision to develop the area, the forested areas. But this development will always be based on the framework of what you said, conservation. But if you look at the legislation, you will see that there is little or no mention of conservation. In fact, you have mentioned about zoos. The government of India can open zoos along the forest lines. You can open safaris. You can open tourist centers and facilities along the forest areas in the name of development. But what the media doesn't tell you is that the emphasis of the wording and the meaning of the amendment is heavily on what we talked about earlier as the strategic linear projects of national importance. So the emphasis here seems to be covered with an euphemism, something that sounds very nice to modern day activists who are concerned about climate change and environment, our forests and lands and fish and wildlife conservation. But if you look deeper into the amendment, it has nothing to do with conservation. It has everything to do with building infrastructure on our forests, and mind you, without having the permission of the local communities and the government are giving. And if you look at the wordings, you will see a lot of national days, strategic days, national security importance. So you are practically giving a free hand to the government of India, who are technically speaking outsiders, because the tribal people, they themselves are the only ones who have both the spirit and the motivation to conserve the areas with their own wisdom that has been tested over the years. So they are practically outsiders who are trying to put their hand into areas they should ideally should not give it.
All right, so thank you so much for letting us know and the viewers know about the new Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023 and why various organizations, various political parties are urging the government of Nagaland to hold a special session of the Nagaland Legislative Assembly so as to not abide with this new amendment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akivi.
Well, you just heard it, and the new Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023 seems to be a dangerous amendment in which, if it applies in Nagaland, then the central government has every right to tangle into our forest land without consultation with the state government or even the local community there, the village councils or the village board, Without any consultation, the centre now will have the power to come into the forest in the name of strategic linear importance or national importance. Whether the Nagaland government will hold the special assembly session, that is yet to be seen, but this law doesn't seem right for the Nagas.